Sweden looks perfect. From the outside, it's the answer to every argument about what modern society should look like. Free healthcare, free university, generous parental leave, a pension system built to last, a country with one of the highest life expectancies on Earth, one of the lowest poverty rates, and a level of social cohesion that the rest of the world has spent decades trying to copy. When politicians in America, Britain and Australia argue about the future of the welfare state, Sweden is the name they reach for. It is the model, the proof of concept, the evidence that a society can tax itself into prosperity and come out better on the other side. But beneath the surface, something is breaking quietly. Not with the speed of Greece in 2010, whose debt crisis detonated in full view of global markets. Not with the chaos of Venezuela, where shelves emptied and the currency collapsed in real time. Not with the visceral shock of a country visibly coming apart. Sweden's crisis does not look like a crisis at all. It is slow. It is hidden. And most Swedes do not fully feel it yet, because the machinery of the welfare state is large enough and old enough that it can absorb years of damage before the structural failure becomes impossible to ignore. Because the statistics still look reassuring on paper, the pension system is technically solvent, but only because it quietly reduced payouts to compensate for a demographic reality it was never designed to handle. The government points to GDP, but the krona has been losing ground against every major currency for years, making Swedes poorer in ways the headline numbers do not capture. Sweden is not collapsing like a country that runs out of money overnight. It is collapsing like a system that was built for one world and is now being asked to survive in a completely different one, slowly, silently, until the weight of all the things it promised becomes more than the math can bear. The central promise of the Swedish model has always been simple. Pay among the highest taxes in the world, and the state will take care of everything: healthcare, housing, education, old age. The contract seemed unbreakable for half a century, but somewhere along the way, without anyone announcing it publicly, the contract started to fail. Not all at once, quietly, item by item. The average earner in Sweden pays roughly half their income in direct and indirect taxes, and yet, waiting times for surgery stretch into months. Housing queues stretch into decades. Schools that were once the envy of Europe have watched their international rankings fall. No other country has experienced such a rapid fall in performance in the OECD's PISA rankings as Sweden. The money is still going in. The results are no longer coming out. This is the trust deficit. It is not that Swedes are being asked to pay more, it is that they are paying the same extraordinary price and receiving measurably less in return every single year. Between 2020 and 2030, the municipal sector needs a budget increase of 200 billion Swedish krona just to keep functioning at its current level. The Swedish National Audit Office calculated this figure and, according to reports, the government hid it from the public. That concealment is the real story, because a welfare state can survive inefficiency. It cannot survive the moment its citizens stop believing it is fixable, and that moment is closer than the official statistics suggest. There is no better illustration of how good intentions can calcify into permanent dysfunction than the Swedish housing market. Rent controls were introduced to protect ordinary people from exploitation, to ensure that a decent home in a great city remained within reach regardless of income. The idea was humane. The outcome was catastrophic. In Stockholm, the average waiting time for a rent-controlled apartment is now around 9 years, nearly twice what it was a decade ago. In the most desirable neighbourhoods, the wait for a centrally located unit can run well over a decade, while senior housing can take 11 years or more. Entire life stages pass in the queue. People graduate from university, start careers, raise families, and still do not have a home. Because the system creates scarcity where none should exist, a black market has filled the gap. Many tenants who hold coveted rent-controlled contracts sublet their properties to secondary tenants at rates double the regulated amount. Only 0.5% of primary rental contracts in central Stockholm ever return to the housing agency. The apartment becomes an asset to be hoarded, not a home to be lived in. Almost a fifth of young tenants in Greater Stockholm admit to having illegally paid for a tenancy contract. The proportion of Swedes aged 20 to 27 living with their parents has been rising and is currently the highest since records began. a generation is being locked out of independence by the very policy designed to protect them. This is what happens when ideology refuses to confront arithmetic. Every welfare state rests on a demographic assumption that enough working-age people will exist to fund the retirement, healthcare and care needs of those who can no longer work. Sweden built its entire social architecture on that assumption, and the assumption is no longer holding. An estimated 1 in 5 Swedes is now over the age of 65, the highest percentage in all of Europe. The population is aging, life expectancy is rising, and the base of future taxpayers, the younger workers who are supposed to sustain the system, is shrinking precisely as the demands on it are growing fastest. The aging population and the gradual build-up of inefficiencies in the public sector mean that welfare services become more expensive and need to employ more people every single year. The pension system has already made its quiet adjustment. Rather than acknowledge the shortfall publicly, responsibilities have been quietly shifted from the national level to municipalities, which bear the ultimate legal responsibility for marginalised groups and those who fall through the gaps in national entitlements. Municipalities with smaller tax bases and fewer resources are being handed obligations they cannot afford. The result is not a visible collapse. It is a slow, decentralised deterioration that varies by postcode, invisible in the national data, devastating in the lived experience. The math has been known for decades. Since 2002, a dozen studies have concluded that the Swedish model is simply not sustainable in its current form. Politicians have looked at those studies and chosen not to act. The bill is now arriving. Sweden spent decades building one of the most cohesive, high-trust societies on Earth. That trust was not simply a cultural sentiment, it was the operational foundation of the welfare state. High-trust societies maintain large public systems because citizens believe the money is well spent and fairly distributed. When trust fractures, the system fractures with it. Sweden's own Prime Minister acknowledged that the country had failed immigrants for 2 decades, leading to the creation of parallel societies and gang violence. The statement was remarkable not for its content but for who was saying it. This was not a criticism from the outside. This was a social democratic Prime Minister whose party had governed Sweden for the majority of the preceding 4 decades, admitting publicly that the model had broken down. The numbers behind that admission are stark. In 2023, 55 people were shot dead in 363 separate shootings in Sweden, a country of just 10 million people. In the same period, only 6 fatal shootings occurred across Norway, Finland and Denmark combined. In less than a decade, Sweden transitioned from having one of Europe's lowest fatal shooting rates to the highest. By 2024, an estimated 62,000 individuals were involved in or connected to criminal networks. The welfare state cannot function without social trust, and social trust cannot survive when large sections of the population feel they live in entirely different realities. Sweden is no longer one country in any meaningful sense. There are several inhabiting the same geography. The founding promise of Sweden's healthcare system was absolute in its ambition, that access to treatment would be equal for every citizen, regardless of income, and that the quality would be high enough that no one would ever need to look elsewhere. That promise has been quietly abandoned. The publicly funded healthcare system guarantees a maximum wait time of 90 days for specialist consultations and an additional 90 days if deemed necessary for operations. In practice, these limits are currently only met for approximately 60 to 70% of patients. In some regions, the figure was below 50% at the beginning of 2024. Half the country in certain areas is waiting longer than the legal guarantee. The guarantee in those places means nothing, and so a parallel system is forming. By the end of 2024, just over 800,000 Swedes held private health insurance, up from just 23,000 in 1990. The primary motivation is simple: to avoid the queue. Private insurance holders access specialist care within 7 working days. Everyone else waits 3 months, and often much longer. Those who can afford private insurance can secure quicker access, directly undermining the principle of equal access that the entire system was built upon. The risk is a snowball effect: declining trust in the public system, growing demand for private alternatives, and the gradual development of a 2-tier structure in a country that was built on the explicit rejection of exactly that. The universal healthcare system is not dead, but it is no longer universal. There is a form of wealth destruction that does not show up in stock crashes or bank failures. It does not make front pages. It does not trigger emergency press conferences. It works in the background, steadily, invisibly, shrinking the real value of everything ordinary citizens have saved and earned. Sweden has been living through exactly this process for years, and most Swedes do not fully understand what has happened to their money. The Swedish krona has been on a depreciating trend since 2014, a trend that accelerated sharply during the post-pandemic period. At its worst, the krona fell to its lowest level ever recorded against the euro. It was described by analysts as the weakest of the G10 currencies of any developed economy. This is not an emerging market. This is a country that the world uses as its benchmark for economic competence. The consequences are not abstract. Between January 2018 and March 2024, the median Swedish investor lost purchasing power equivalent to approximately 22% due to inflation and currency depreciation. Every single person who held their savings in Swedish krona during this period saw their real wealth decline. A weaker currency means imported goods become more expensive. It means energy costs more. It means the international purchasing power of every Swedish wage and every Swedish pension is quietly diminished. The welfare state taxes its citizens heavily to provide security, but it cannot tax away the silent corrosion of a currency that nobody in power has managed to defend. Every system has a breaking point, not a dramatic moment of collapse, but a threshold beyond which the productive, tax-paying class decides that the arrangement is no longer worth sustaining. Sweden is approaching that threshold faster than its political class is willing to acknowledge. The mechanism is straightforward. The welfare state depends on high earners accepting an extraordinary tax burden in exchange for services they genuinely value and use. The moment those earners begin to feel that the services are degrading, that private alternatives deliver better outcomes, that the system is being stretched across obligations it was never designed to carry, the social contract starts to unravel from the top. High-level private sector employees already show weaker support for state intervention than their public sector counterparts. The group most capable of sustaining the system through taxation is also the group most capable of opting out of it. Income inequality in Sweden has been rising sharply since 2021, and the redistributive effect of taxes and benefits has diminished significantly compared to the pre-2000s era. The system is becoming less equal precisely as it becomes less efficient. That combination does not produce reform, it produces resentment, and resentment, sustained long enough, produces political realignment. The Sweden Democrats are now the second largest party in parliament. The governing coalition depends on their support. Sweden's political centre has already shifted in ways that would have been unimaginable 20 years ago. The breaking point is not a future event. It is a process that is already underway. When the dust settles on what Sweden is becoming, the picture will not look like the utopia the rest of the world has been citing. It will look like the cautionary tale Sweden's politicians spent decades insisting could never happen here. Healthcare will be formally two-tiered, with a premium private system for those who can afford it, and a rationed, underfunded public remnant for those who cannot. The privatisation of Swedish welfare services, which has already progressed further than in any other European country, has transformed the nation from a social democratic ideal into something that increasingly resembles a neoliberal showcase. Private equity firms run schools, for-profit companies manage elderly care, and criminal networks have begun infiltrating tax-funded welfare services, with healthcare centres and pharmacies in Gothenburg raided in early 2025 in connection with organised crime. The neighbourhoods where integration failed will not recover quickly. The parallel societies that Sweden's own Prime Minister admitted existed will deepen, not dissolve, because the resources required to reverse decades of segregation are not available in a system already stretched beyond its capacity. And the young, educated Swedes who see all of this clearly will face a choice that previous generations never had to make: stay and fund a system that may never deliver on its promises, or leave for somewhere that asks less and offers something real in return. That quiet exodus is already beginning. The country that the world built its dreams on is building something else entirely now. History has never made an exception for good intentions. Every society that has ever tried to build a permanent safety net, funded by an assumption of endless growth and unshakable demographic stability, has eventually confronted the same arithmetic. The assumptions change. The math does not. Sweden is not a failure. It is a lesson. A precise and unavoidable demonstration that systems designed for one world cannot simply be maintained through political will when the underlying conditions that made them possible have fundamentally changed. The demographics have shifted. The currency has weakened. The social cohesion that made high taxation tolerable has eroded. And the bill, the one that was always coming, is now due. What Sweden's story demands of its citizens and of anyone watching from the outside is not despair. It is clarity. The clarity to stop outsourcing your financial security to institutions that were never as permanent as they appeared. The clarity to build personal resilience, independent of whatever a government promises in any given decade. The clarity to understand that the most dangerous economic position is not poverty. It is a comfortable dependency on a system that is quietly running out of the capacity to keep its word. If this video changed the way you see welfare states, and the assumptions buried inside them, share it with one person who still believes the model is unbreakable. And if you want to keep thinking clearly about the economic forces shaping your world, subscribe, because the next story is just as important as this one.